政府声音真实传递焦点话题，权威解读。大家好，欢迎收看由中国新华电视香港台为您带来的港府传真。首先，我们来回顾一下港府近期的政策动态。近日，香港特区政府运输及房屋局局长张炳良在立法会表示，根据优化了的公屋轮候册入息限额检讨机制计算，2013至14年度的入息限额会较2012至13年度整体平均增加6%。房屋委员会会继續按照優化機制，每年檢討公屋輪候冊入息限額，根據最新社會經濟情況，客觀評估申請公屋家庭的負擔能力。
喺優化嘅機制底下，非住屋開支嘅部分可以根據甲類消費物價指數剔除呢個住屋開支嘅變動，或者係按照政府統計處每一季進行嘅勞工收入統計調查所錄得嘅名義工資指數變動呢，係進行調整。並且係以兩者較高者為準嘅。由於名義工資指數涵蓋非經理級或者係專業級嘅職業組別，例如話技術員、文員、服務人員同埋技工等，而呢啲職業組別嘅人士呢，往往都係最有可能咧係申請公屋嘅。因此，名義工資指數變動呢，係有助衡量公屋嘅目標群組嘅收入變動，以及係反映引進法定最低工資之後對佢收入嘅影響嘅。
公營租住房屋簡稱公屋，是香港政府為保障中低收入者的住房需求而建造的房屋。目前大約有1/3的香港人住在政府的公屋裡。市民們對公屋制度的看法如何？他們又對港府有哪些期望呢？請您跟隨我們記者的腳步，一起去看一看。
比起以前好好多㗎啦，比起以前嘅徙市區啊，或者嗰啲安置區啊。就靚好多，同埋設備好好多。而家香港交通嘅網絡咧，由天水圍去到沙田啊，都係1個鐘，應該就幾好㗎啦，應該。
以前係4個人住咯，可能我嫁咗嚟咪依家即係多個小朋友，咪有6個人住咯，咁咪依家咪覺得擠迫咯。小朋友又大啦，係咪啊？冇自己嘅空間。
社區都好啊，要老人中心啦，要安老院啦，都幾好㗎。社區呢度老人家都好多㗎，飲茶方便啦，呢度有茶樓啊，各方面都好啊呢度。
社區活動都好多，都幾好啊。暑假或者過時過節啊，都有即係嗰啲咩聯誼啊，嗰啲宴會啊、旅行啊咁樣玩下咯，開心下咯。如果係中意就。
香港地少人多，地價高企，房屋供不應求，這讓香港大部分中低收入者很難擁有一套屬於自己的住房。針對這樣的情況，香港特區政府自1953年就開始資助公營房屋。那麼60年來，香港公營房屋取得了哪些成就，又面臨着什麼挑戰呢？本期節目，我們特別採訪了香港特區政府運輸及房屋局常任秘書長Duncan Pescod先生，請他為您談一談香港的公營房屋。Nice to meet you, Mr. Pescod. On behalf of Hong Kong Voice Express, thank you for taking the interview. We know that Hong Kong Housing Authority newly released a video to review the last 60 years of public housing in Hong Kong. So could you please tell us the achievements you have made during the last 60 years and what makes you most proud of?
It's a very big question, I have to say, covering 60 years in a few minutes. But I think the most important achievement is the fact that we have been able to provide quality housing for over a third of the population in public rental housing. In 60 years, that's an amazing achievement.
港府的統計顯示，截至2012年3月底，香港超過200萬的居民居住在公營租住房屋，也就是人們所熟知的公屋。而如果加上居者有其屋等其他計劃，一共約有46.2%的香港市民居住在受政府資助的房屋裡。
But it's not just about providing accommodation. It's about providing homes, a community, the whole facilities that people need, schools and playgrounds and shopping facilities and welfare facilities. We work very closely with other government agencies and departments. So, for example, we have an aging population in Hong Kong. So within the public housing estates, we provide a range of services, not the housing authority or the housing department, but through non-government agencies or other government departments. We provide daycare centres for the elderly. We provide specialist medical care facilities for the elderly. We also provide residential care homes for the elderly. That's just one example. We also have young families coming in, so we need to provide kindergartens. We need to provide schools within the area of a public housing estate. Because if we're building, say, 8 to 10,000 units in one estate, you're talking of a population that could be 30 to 40,000 people. That's a big population in a small area, and they have to have all of different facilities. So the policy is to accommodate anybody. It doesn't matter what their circumstances, what their condition, their age, their race. If they qualify and they get through the waiting list, we must have suitable accommodation for them. So we always try to be responsive to provide the right services for our tenants.
2次大战后，香港房屋严重短缺，很多战争灾民只能在山边搭建简陋房屋，人们称之为寮屋。1953年12月，10家伪寮屋发生大火，一夜间超过5万灾民无家可归。港府随即开始兴建房屋，以供灾民临时栖身以及安置拆迁寮屋居民。同时，成立半独立的机构屋宇建设委员会，开始为香港中低收入家庭建设设备相对齐全的廉租屋。
We started very, very small. We started with 6, 7-story buildings, no lifts, no individual toilets, small units for 5, 6 people. And from that, we now build 40, 50-story buildings, lifts to every floor, individual toilets, in some cases, more than one toilet facility within the blocks, kitchen facilities, and within the blocks, we also provide all the different resources and amenities that people need. We've come a long way in 60 years.
The figures show that the average waiting time for public rental housing is around 2.6 years. But sometimes it takes a qualified family 5 or even more years to receive a quota. It seems that the public rental housing could not fulfill the needs of people who cannot afford private rental housing. So what will HA do to shorten their waiting time?
Since 1997, the waiting times have come down substantially. In 1997, I think the time was over between 6 to 7 years waiting time. We've reduced that now to less than 3 years for most family applicants. Of course, there are certain groups that we acknowledge we have a particular problem with, and that's larger families. Families may be 6, 7 members. For those, we're looking at how we can increase the number of larger flats so that we can try and reduce their waiting time. Now, I should say there's one category that will wait longer, and that is young single applicants, because at the moment our commitment to rehouse single applicants is not limited to 3 years. Their chance of getting housing will depend on how long they are on our quota and point waiting list.
截至2013年3月底，公屋轮候册上共有116900宗一般家庭申请，而非长者单身人士的申请则有111500宗。为呼应单身人士以及其他有特殊需要的申请者的需求，香港房屋委员会正在研究新的公屋结构。
As you can see from the model, these are what we call modular flats. They're basically the same design in most of our new developments, but each development is different. The reality, of course, is that for this sort of development, we have to plan 5 years or 6 years ahead. So every decisions we're taking today will have more of these large units and a few more smaller units. Doesn't come into production until 5 years later. By using this modular approach, by using standard designs for the flats, it means that we can build quicker. We can do a lot of the work as prefabrication. In other words, the walls, the toilets, the kitchen areas can be built in a factory, shipped to the site, and then just put together. So it means that the build is quicker, the build quality is higher, and of course the production should be more suited to the demand that we have. We're using these techniques to try and make sure that we're efficient in our production. The other waiting list point that I'd like to make is that for elderly applicants, we actually try and give them their first offer within 2 years. So that, again, we recognize that people, late 50s, early 60s, we need to get them in as quickly as we can. And again, in that case, we actually achieve just over a year, 1.4 years. So that's achieving a reasonable target. The real solution is to build more units. It's as simple as that. And government has already committed to do that.
协助有住屋需要的低收入家庭入住能力可以负担的居所，是房屋委员会的目标和理想。因此，除了多建新的公屋外，对部分已经落成的公屋进行重新分配，确保公屋发放给确实有需要的申请者，也是房委会的工作重点。
The other opportunity, I think, is that we have to look at making sure that only people who really genuinely need access to public housing are the ones that are in public housing. So we need to look at people who are what we call affluent tenants, well-off tenants, people who can afford perhaps to be looking to buy a home ownership scheme or in the private sector, and encourage them to move out. So we need to look at both more production as well as better use of our existing stock. And every year we manage to take back between 7,000 and 8,000 units that can also be allocated. So on an annual basis, we're probably allocating something between 20 to 22,000 units to people on the waiting list.
曾同被誉为亚洲4小龙的新加坡和香港一样，是一个地少人多的城市。就人均土地面积而言，新加坡的理论人口密度甚至比香港还大。然而，其人均住房面积却几乎是香港的2倍。但对于这种比较 ，Mr. Pescod 认为并不合适。
Hong Kong, if you look around, is a very, very hilly place. Many of the hills are very, very steep slopes. Singapore, by comparison, is actually quite flat. And they also have a lot of reclamation, which is flat. So their space available for use is much, much greater as a proportion of the total space than ours. So they have more space that's usable, even though perhaps their total space is less than ours. And of course, their population is also less than ours. So you can't really compare Singapore and Hong Kong just on the spatial situation. I don't think you can actually compare Singapore and Hong Kong on the per capita space per person either. For the reason is we have traditionally focused on public rental housing. Obviously, in a place where land is at a premium, where we have a real constraint on our ability to build, we have to build very tall, 50, 60 stories. We need to make sure that we maximize the use of the space. In Singapore, they have moved gradually and now almost entirely to home ownership. So it's a very different concept to ours. In public housing, you enter public housing, again, as a single person or a married couple. Your circumstances change. You can then apply for a larger space. And we would consider that. So your situation changes, we can accommodate you. So in many ways, it's a more efficient use of the space.
Since Hong Kong government is going to develop the northeast of new territories, what role will HA and HD going to play in this big plan?
Well, we're going to be a very active participant because obviously we would expect to get a substantial proportion of the land for housing allocated for public rental or home ownership scheme development. So we'll be involved in that development process. I suspect we'll also be involved in some of the clearance exercises, providing accommodation for those people that have to be moved out. We are going to be involved in the planning process. We'll be looking and working with planning department to recommend the mix, the size, the location of where the different housing elements should be. So yes, as with all development concepts, Housing Department will have a very active role to play, and indeed I can say we're already involved in that process today.
感谢您收看本期港府传真。想了解更多节目内容，新浪微博用户请关注港府传真。海外观众可以透过 YouTube、Facebook 订阅 CNC TV HK 进行收看。期待您的关注，我们下周同一时间再见。